spinnerbait. Man, what a hard pulling fish. Oh, man. Man, that fish like to pull me out of the boat. I never get him up here. I can't get him up here. Now there's a nice one on a spinnerbait. Whew. Look how big and fat and healthy that fish is. That fish is probably 5 pounds, maybe a little over, but look at that. Look how good it's eating. Now we'd been throwing a topwater bait this morning and we'd had a few strikes, you know. We'd started out this morning and we were throwing a topwater bait and we had some bites on the topwater, but the sun's kind of getting up, and as you can see, we were starting to get a little breeze. When we first got here this morning, it was dead flat calm, kind of warm and humid. We had a few topwater bites, but really the topwater bite wasn't real good. So I made mention that we had a little breeze picking up, had a little chop on the surface, and that's usually when a spinnerbait gets good, is when you get a little disturbance on the surface, a little wind, a little cloud cover. And I picked this spinnerbait up and man, I threw out there and caught that big fish. So for some reason, some days fish like to come up to the surface and bite on top. Some days they want more of a subsurface bait. So, I picked up this little Picasso Inviswire spinnerbait. And this is a new bait just come out. It's got a brown heat treated wire. It's 27 thousandths. It's got a special loop and it's got a lot of vibration. But one thing about this bait, it's a light wire. You get a lot more vibration, but also when you get a light wire spinnerbait like this, you have to tune it. So like that fish there, bent it up. So always when you get your spinnerbait, always look at the head and the hook. And as you can see, I've got the wire, and I want this top wire to be perfectly straight. So I may need to just kind of tweak it just a little bit to the side, but I want all this in line. I want this top wire to cover the hook because that's what's going to make it weedless. So whenever you're throwing a spinnerbait, whatever it is, this is a light wire spinnerbait, it bends a little easier. Always be sure to keep your spinnerbaits tuned. That'll help you, number one, it'll help you not get hung up as much. So let's see if we can pick a spinnerbait up and see if we can catch a few more fish. There's one right there. Oh gosh, my hand slipped off the reel handle. Oh man. Man, they hit this thing. They hit this spinnerbait so hard, and I wasn't prepared for that bite there again. But see, now all of a sudden, we've picked a spinnerbait up, something that runs just a little bit under the surface, and we've picked up 2 fish. So always kind of pay attention to what the fish are telling you. That's one thing about this heat-treated wire, it's pretty tough. Let me try that again. Now, I did everything wrong. My hand slipped off the reel handle, but I still managed to keep up with that fish, even though it was a little difficult. Of course, so one thing I did notice is the size of the shad were about the size of the willow blades on that spinnerbait, which, a lot of times that's what you want to do. You want to try to match the size of the bait to your blades. If they're small, then you want to throw a smaller bladed spinnerbait. If on some lakes you have big gizzard shad, things of that nature, you want to throw bigger bladed spinnerbaits, number 6s, maybe even number 7s, like they do a lot of times down in Florida. I still can't get over that one fish, how hard it hit that spinnerbait. That was just an unbelievable, that was not, I didn't catch him, he caught me kind of deals, when, there's one right there. That's the second fish off that brush pile. I just caught that one just a second ago off of it. That's the second fish. And that's another good tip. I think a lot of times we kind of get in a hurry, and I know this is something that I'm guilty of at times, but whenever you come to like a big brush pile or a lay down tree and you throw in there and you catch one, a lot of times if that piece of cover was good enough for one fish, a lot of times it can be good enough for 2 or 3 fish. So don't be afraid to make multiple casts. And that's something else that I can tell you I've learned from spinnerbait fishing through the years is a lot of times, you know, people are real bad about pulling up to a lay down or a stump or a stick and making a cast on the left side and a cast on the right side, then they move on to the next one. Now, sometimes if those fish aren't real aggressive, I know I fished a tournament years ago fishing flooded bushes where I would throw 6 times to each side of the bush, and then 6 times to the left side, 6 times to the right side, and sometimes the fish would bite on the first cast and sometimes it was the 6th. So a lot of times when you've got a big brushy lay down tree or a piece of cover, what you have to think is that fish may not be setting right on the edge. He may be deep inside the heart of that tree or that lay down. And the first cast, you may get his attention. The second cast, he may go, what was that? In the third cast, he may start to move out to the edge of that tree. So a lot of times by making multiple casts with a spinnerbait or even a square bill, a crankbait, even a worm or a jig, sometimes when you come to a good piece of cover, the more casts you make, a lot of times you reposition the fish. In other words, he may not be on the edge of it, he may be in the heart, the center of it, and maybe by that 6th cast, you've got his attention and he's come out to the edge and he's ready to bite. I'm gonna try to start on the end. And I threw over it, but I'll try to start my first. There's one. It's not a bass though, is it? Is it a little bass? A little bass. And I watched him come up there and heat my spinnerbait. Okay, now there's one bass. Now we're gonna see, that's a pretty big log, and I tried to throw on this far end first because whenever you come up, a lot of times you could have 2 or 3 or 4 fish, so you don't wanna throw dead across it and drag that fish out and mess up the whole piece of cover. So we're gonna make another cast across the end. Of course, I could get in there a little tighter. And we're gonna see if we can catch one off the other end. We may and we may not. But it's one thing I like to try to do as I approach cover, try to do it in a system to where I might be able to catch multiple fish off of a piece of cover. You know, I don't want to throw, you know, ultimately the best cast would be to get over and throw all the way down that log. But sometimes you want to always start out on the edges, the outer edges, before you throw to the center first. And that way you might not mess up. If you throw right to the center at first, drag a fish out, you may scare another fish that was maybe on the edge. So that's another thing. I always like to try to systematically think about it, to try to give myself an opportunity to catch more than one fish off a piece of cover. And see, now our wind's picked back up. We're getting a pretty good ripple, which is a good thing. So many beautiful targets to throw. Ooh, hey. You know, I'm starting to get the feeling that I need to be throwing out in the shad. You know? That's a good one. Good Lord, look at this bass. Oh man, I've got like a 4 or 5 pounder that is short line me. Oh man, check this bass out right here. You talk about a nice one. Now that was about my 5th cast that I made through that tree right there. Now he actually, if you look, I felt him bump it on the 5th cast, and actually I got him through the nose. But that took 5 casts, 5 throws through that tree before I ever caught that bass. And as you can see, that's a nice one right there. So I'm gonna let him go. And once again, you know, since we've picked this spinnerbait up, you know, this Picasso spinnerbait with this new heat-treated 27 thousandths wire, you know, We've caught 2 really big fish, and we've almost put a limit in the boat. So, but it took 5 throws through that piece of cover before I ever got that fish to bite. And you know, that's one thing I've noticed now. I don't know what it is, you know, the fish are biting, but it's taking a little more to encourage them. They're not always biting on the first cast. So, and you know, we fished through this pocket earlier this morning with a topwater bait and had 1 or 2 bites, but so I think I'm gonna fish back through it now with a spinnerbait and, you know, see if we can't pick up a few more fish. Plus, we've also seen some in here schooling, which is another good reason to fish back through here. Yeah, I think it does. I think angling pressure has an effect for multiple casts. Sometimes it's just, it's just like I liken it to, like if somebody comes up to you and just keeps poking you in the chest, eventually you're gonna, you know, on the first poke they might get a reaction from you, but on the 5th or 6th poke they're gonna finally make you angry. And I think that's a lot of the ways with making multiple casts to pieces of cover, you know, whether it be a spinnerbait or a square bill or a plastic worm or a jig or whatever it might be. I think, you know, the more casts you make, I think eventually that fish, you know, you either you aggravate him or you trigger his instinct, you know, to finally feed. And I think sometimes it's angling pressure, sometimes it's just the mood of the fish. You know, sometimes they're just not in an aggressive mood, and you know, I think after it comes through there 8 or, you know, 4, 5, 6, 8 times, you know, finally he decides, hey, I'm gonna take advantage of this, because, you know, bass are opportunists.
Check us out at wired2fish.com.